First and foremost, thank you all for your participation last week. 25 plus hours of hearings and testimony, and everybody was with us pretty much the entire time. So I just want to thank you all for your participation, your wonderful questions. I know I learned a lot. In fact, every single member on this committee has told me that they all learned a lot as well. And just for the general public and everybody watching, while we move on with session, certainly what we learned last week is not forgotten, and action will be taken throughout this session. People are filing legislation as we speak in response to what they heard. And so as we move forward today, while today is really not an extension of those hearings, today is our organizational meeting. That doesn't mean that we're not taking action and that we're not taking response to what we heard. But we have till the end of session to actually write and pass legislation in response to what we heard. And I know that's ongoing, and I know it's ongoing discussions the Speaker's office is having with the Lieutenant Governor's office, with the Governor's office. And so we're not just leaving with what we heard last Thursday and Friday and not doing anything about it. We certainly are taking action. Let the record reflect that Speaker Craddock is now present. Also, some other housekeeping items. Members would like to introduce Amanda Robertson. She's our clerk for the committee. Jennifer DeWitt is our assistant clerk today. This is an organizational hearing, members, so we're going to hear from basically everybody who we have, for lack of a better word, oversight on. Certainly, you're welcome to ask any questions to any of the people, but it is invited testimony only. We will not have a hearing on Monday. Again, we only have, right now, we have 2 bills referred to our committee, both by Chairman Darby. So until we get more bills in our committee, we will wait to have hearings on legislation, because that's what we're required to do. So with that, members, does anyone have any questions or anything they want to say before we get started? All right, that's easy. With that, I'll call up Commissioner Craddock. Thank you for being here today. Good to see you again.
See you. Long time no see.
Long time no see.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. For the record, Christy Craddock, Chairman of the Railroad Commission. So we've done the hard stuff. I thought I'd start out by reminding y'all what we actually do as an agency. So there are 3 of us that are all elected statewide. The chairman rotates amongst the 3 of us, and so I'm the chair right now. I think I draw the short straw, as most of y'all know, during session, which I'm going to change the straw drawing, I think. We are the oldest oil and gas regulatory body in the entire country, and we're the second oldest regulatory body in the state, animal health being the oldest. So they're a year older than we are. Again, I said there were 3 of us. Our regulatory jurisdiction is oil and gas permitting, pipelines and pipeline safety, of which we've got 470,000 gathering lines, interstate lines, and intrastate lines. It's a lot of pipe in the state. We're the biggest pipe state by a 6th. We also do gas utility and gas utility regulations. So you heard a lot about that in the past week, and gas utility meaning to your house, which has been important. Alternative fuels, so propane and LNG come through us as far as safety and safety standards. Coal and surface mining, which is important to us. Coal is, if you look from East Texas over, and as well along the border, we have coal mines, strip mines in the state. We do the permitting as well as the remediation. We're in charge of watching the remediation and permitting for that as well. So coal is an important part of the state as well. We also, as most of you know, do have a well plugging program that we are in charge of, as well as, again, site remediation, not just for coal, but for oil and gas sites as there are issues. And I also like to remind people, because we forget, we have uranium mines in the state. So if you are trying to do permit a new uranium mine exploration, you come to us. If you have a current one, you go back to the Department of Health. Y'all set it up that way, so y'all can, that's okay with us. We also have geothermal rules in our state, in our agency, we haven't used in about 25 years, but there's some conversation about that. And the other thing that we do at our agency that we've had rules in place since about 2003 is carbon capture. And we are using carbon capture in this state in oil fields right now for enhanced oil recovery. So we do a lot in the state, and I think we're the most important agency in the state, by the way. So today we have roughly 840 people who work for us. We have 10 field offices. That's one more than last time I was in front of this committee. We added Lubbock back in our field office world. We had an office up there 25 years ago, and we put Lubbock back in play about a year ago. Really, we were having problems keeping people in Midland and paying people in the West Texas area, and we've seen a real positive for us having a field office in Lubbock. It's allowed us to offload some stuff out of the, quote, Permian into the Lubbock field office, and there's still activity up in that area. So that's been important for us. Today there's 194 rigs running. We're producing about 3.98 million barrels a day. That's off only about 5% from this time last year. We're finding, though, technology is getting smarter, and so our number of permits are down as far as the number of permits we're issuing. I'll get back to that in just a minute. We're also have about almost 28 BCF in natural gas a day. Interestingly, that didn't drop much from this time last year, and we don't have information in yet from last month, but we haven't seen a significant drop from what we've been being told of what happened from beginning of month to the end. Just kind of the middle had some challenges. So, so our job really as regulators is to make sure. Well, that was special. Is to make sure we are regulating but also protecting the environment. I thought I'd tell you for just a minute kind of what we did during COVID, since I know that's been one of the conversations y'all have been talking about what happened, and we're about a year out from COVID. We as an agency shut down the week of spring break, kind of like I think every other agency did. And I say shut down, we quit going to the office in Austin, but we didn't shut down. So we still had people going into our office. Specifically, our mailroom never closed, which means we were still able to do our job. We did more inspections last year under COVID. We did over about 200,000 inspections in this state, so our field people never went home. We had inspectors every place doing their job and doing it effectively. We also continued to issue drilling permits, but because of COVID and supply and demand issues in the country and in the world, our drilling permits are off now 73%, and our budget has now been affected by about 31%. So as I was in budget committees for the last 2 days explaining that with the eyebrows kind of going up, we are trying to manage through that as we have before in the past. We will manage through it for the end of this year, but as we get to 22 and 23, we recognize that drilling permits will be down. We anticipate they'll be down about a third from 2019. 2019, we issued roughly 13,000 drilling permits in this state. If we stay on track with controllers' numbers and what we're seeing, we believe that going into 22, 23, our numbers will be off by a third. As far as drilling permits, technology got smarter, and just they need fewer drilling permits, and we're just seeing a change in the industry. So that becomes a challenge for us. For those of you who've watched my budget for a few years, we did what we're supposed to do, we think, which was quit hiring people last April. We kind of shut everything down unless you were considered emergency, absolutely necessary, or you were an inspector. First and foremost, we always try to keep our inspectors fully staffed up. That's important to us. We also quit buying trucks. Y'all have all heard my truck conversation, or a bunch of you have. Trucks are important to us, and we quit buying trucks last year. We took the 5% cut, so that was part of the trucks not being bought. We also paused on a couple of projects we were doing as far as site remediation. That being said, we did plug about 1,700 wells. 1,400 was our metric last year. We plugged roughly 1,700 last year, and our metric this year is 1,400 to plug, and we're on track to do that as well. So it's important to us to continue those programs, and as we go forward, this year we thought our priority was going to be budget only. Our priority is a lot of things, budget being one piece of it, and so We are continuing to ask for consistent funding going forward. That's going to be a challenge. We had a great committee on appropriations and actually Senate Finance too, who's recognized we needed to at least have a consistent budget and have the authority to spend, but our challenge is going to be dollars coming in. So in 22, we anticipate will be about $450,000 down from the dollars we anticipate that we need for our budget. And we anticipate in 23 that we'll be down about $9.5 million. Why is there a big discrepancy? We've got some dollars right now that we will use going into the next cycle, but we will not have a lot of reserves left at the end. So the other plus that we started this year is, and then we signed the contract in February, and a lot of y'all again helped us last cycle, which was our IT project. We're on a mainframe with Fortran. We signed our contract last February, and that project is moving forward. We got about almost $26 million this biennium to move that project forward, and we are on time and under budget. We've already rolled out a piece in March last year. If you go back and look, we do hearings in-house, and our hearings process is now mostly online as far as filings and keeping track of caseloads, and that's been a huge plus for us as we've been gone for COVID, obviously. The next piece that we anticipate to roll out this spring and will be finished by the end of this biennium, pipelines will come next. We should see that sometime this spring, and phase 1 of the oil and gas world will come next as well, which again, we hope to have that done by the end of this biennium. So as we move forward, IT, it's an ongoing project. It will take us through, we think, about 2024 to 2025 realistically to finish what we're working on. We've asked for and received in our budget request $21.5 million for the 22-23 cycle to continue moving that forward, and we appreciate that. My IT's guys are excited, but I will say this, we're number 4 on the DIR list, and we are doing what we're supposed to do, and if not, I'm sure I would be hearing from some of y'all, but we are seeing some real movement for that, and it's really, we're finding more efficiencies and a lot more effective, and we appreciate the help with that. To that end, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop, and if people have got questions, I don't know what you're doing on the floor, but if you stop and people have got questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Don't mind us. Thank you, Commissioner. Let the record reflect that Representative Reynolds is now present. Sorry. Members, like I said, don't mind us. Any questions, members, for Commissioner Craddock? Vice Chair Herrera?
Madam Chair, let me, essentially, I think they're working on the security measures here. The button may have inadvertently been pressed, and so we're just trying to take care of that. And so,
It's fine. It's just
but,
Craig's face was funny. It's fine.
right.
Never a dull moment.
Right. But I want to go back to last week's hearings on the winter storm. Since the hearings, the Chair Walker for the Public Utility Commission submitted her resignation, I believe, effective Monday. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that letter.
I really haven't. I think I've been in this is my 3rd day to testify, so I think I've had a lot going on this week.
Yeah, everybody's got.
Sorry, I haven't paid attention. I'm aware she resigned, but haven't had time to read the letter.
Okay. Let me, and I don't intend to read all of it, but I wanted to, there's a sentence in here where she wrote, I believe others should come forward in dignity and courage and acknowledge how their actions or inactions contributed to the situation. And the question is, understanding that you and she had conversations, did she mention to you, or has she mentioned to you who some of these other individuals would be that she's asking to have dignity and courage to acknowledge how their actions or inactions contributed to the situation?
I haven't talked to Chair, well, I guess now former Chair Walker. I haven't talked to her in a week, so I don't have any idea what's, like I said, I haven't read the letter, so I don't have any idea what's in it.
Okay.
I haven't seen her or talked to her since hearings last Thursday, right?
But in the conversations that were referenced in the hearings last week, she didn't mention to you anything related to that sentence?
No, sir.
I'm sorry?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Make sure I hit the right button here, not the panic button. Sorry for that. Thank you, Representative Herrera. Members, any other questions? Really? Speaker Craddock?
go on? Okay, well, the light didn't go on. All right. Chairman Craddock, you discussed the drilling permits. What percentage of y'all's budget is because of drilling permits? What percentage of that? So when you see the drop, what are you going to lose on that?
So roughly, if we're down 70% or 73% in the number of drilling permits, that oil and gas regulatory cleanup fund, which is where a lot of those dollars go in, that overall is 54% of our budget. And of that 54% of our overall budget, we put our drilling fees in there. We also put enforcement penalties and other fees. So overall, and my budget people aren't here, I can give you an exact percentage, but it's about a half of that half. So at least 25% to 30% of our dedicated account is based on those drilling permits.
So do you quit plugging wells, or do you ask the legislature to make up that gap, or what, how do you do that?
Well, that's our challenge this cycle. So what we've come in and asked is that the legislature give us a rider for this next session that says, look, if you get below 90% of what you expect to come in, then we will give you some dollars. And so the House has put that rider in, which we appreciate. And it can't go above $25 million if we need some money from the legislature. Long term, we've got to find a long-term solution, because we do appreciate and anticipate that industry will not be drilling quite as much as they have been in the last several cycles, and that we need to figure out how to be more consistent with our budget long term, and that's going to be working with the legislature going forward.
What about horizontal wells? So a horizontal well will take the place of 3 to 5 vertical wells,
That's
I
correct.
assume. So that means instead of 5 permits, you get 1 permit. So you're also losing revenue in that aspect. You don't charge a larger fee, or do you charge a larger fee for a horizontal well than you do a vertical well?
It's based on the verticals, so we don't charge for the horizontal. Neither does anybody else in the country, by the way. So we charge based on the vertical part.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Representative Guerin?
Commissioner Craddock, excuse me. You're planning to plug, or your plans are to plug roughly the same number of wells that you plugged over the last biennium, is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And without help from appropriations, do you think you'll have the money to do that?
So the last couple of cycles, actually with Representative Darby's help, we have gotten additional dollars to put in our well plugging program starting now 4 years ago. Before that, we were averaging 500 to 800 wells a year. We've, the last several cycles, the last 4 years, been at 1,200 to 1,400 a year, and we appreciate the help. This budget cycle, the legislature I should say 22, 23, the legislature's put in our budget $57 million for 22 and $56 million for 23 to continue a well plugging program, and we appreciate that. If we didn't have those additional dollars, that program would backtrack, and there'd be not enough dollars to continue that vibrant program.
Well, you've done you all done a good job, and I think you said you did 1,700, which was even above what you had planned. So
Yes, sir.
thank y'all for doing such a good job with it.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. We appreciate the help.
Members, any other questions? Representative Reynolds?
I'm not sure how to turn this mic on.
There's a button. Where's the button, right? So this basically right in the middle. Here's yours right here.
On this side? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner Craddock. I appreciate you being here again, and very insightful testimony. And I understand the concerns that you have about some of the fiscal constraints that you may have, and based upon the circumstances. So my question is really regarding that. Would raising fines and fees statutorily help in the long term, given that there are caps on well binding permit fees and fines and natural resource codes?
So that's a conversation, that's a longer conversation, but as an agency, we're not in here asking for additional fees. Look, I look at what this industry brings into the state to begin with. Last year, and I'm sure that somebody behind me will testify that they brought in almost $14 billion into the state. So we don't actually think we need additional fees. We just want access to some of the dollars that this industry continues to bring in. We're a pretty small agency when you look at what we do, and so we don't think that additional fees, quite frankly, would change the dynamic for us a lot and would probably be damaging to the industry at this point.
Okay, and a couple of follow-up questions. And you gave us some great information when you testified before the combined hearing, and I know that we had discussed some best practices that you could make recommendations on, and I know I asked you about one of the constraints that you had with conferring with other commissioners, even during an emergency because of the Open Meetings Act. Had you gave any further thought about whether or not it would be helpful perhaps to have the ability in situations, extended circumstances, under, a natural disaster such as we incurred, to be able to, confer with the other commissioners during the crisis?
Well, I appreciate the question and the thought again, and I think we manage pretty well, but if y'all want to have that conversation, we'd be happy to continue that conversation with y'all as a policy conversation. Yes, sir.
And I know it came up at the hearing. It was asked by several members about reporting back. Do you anticipate that you'll be able to report back some of those best practices that you've outlined that could help in the future as we look to resolve issues going forward?
Yes, sir. We're working on those as we speak.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And Representative Reynolds, thank you. You bring up a great point, and something I should have mentioned in my opening. We've obviously last week asked a lot of people to submit reports to us and best practices and ways they'd like to move forward, and then possible legislation that they'd like to see for us to move forward. We're still waiting on those reports due. I think some of the people said they'd have them turned in 7 days. I know I've had conversations with many of the people who are in front of us, letting us know that they need a little more time. So my view is, my feedback to them, and it was to Commissioner Craddock, is certainly give us what you need and take, basically, knowing that next week is a filing deadline, but take all the time that you need to give us the most thorough information you can. We'd rather have it right than just have it expedited. So to that point, we've made that request to every single person who was put in front of us that said they'd send a report to us. And as soon as we get it, we will distribute it to the members on this committee for sure. Any other questions, members, for Commissioner Craddock? Commissioner Craddock, thank you very much for your time. We thank you for being a great resource to this committee, and especially speaking personally. I want to thank you for all the open communication in the last several weeks, and I know we'll be talking much more, and thank you and the other commissioners for all that y'all do for the state of Texas. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much. Chair calls Mr. Todd Staples. You ever done this before?
Couple of times.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, my name is Todd Staples. I'm president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Thanks for the chance to visit with you today. And thank you for your leadership and service on behalf of all Texans. You're making a difference, and it means a lot to millions, and we're thankful for that and for you. I have a handout that's been prepared for you. I will not go through each page of that. You will probably be glad that I don't, but I wanted to give you just a snapshot about what we think is occurring in Texas today and some key points. Really, I want to just emphasize 3 points: the economic impact of oil and gas in Texas, the economic progress that is being made in addressing the concerns about our climate, and then a roadmap going forward about where we are, and certainly answer any questions. The Texas Oil and Gas Association represents all sectors of the energy industry, from upstream production, midstream transmission, refining. We even, I like to call it the 4 Ps of energy: production, pipelines, processing, and ports. And it's because of that extreme amount of investment in infrastructure in Texas that enables this industry to play such an important role in our state's economy. Last year, it directly employed over 400,000 Texans. Last year, this industry represented about 30% of the entire private sector economy. It contributed $13.9 billion in state and local taxes and state revenues. This industry is the funder for the Rainy Day Fund, the Permanent University Fund, the Permanent School Fund, and a great deal toward the Highway Fund, and are proud of the partnership that we have in Texas. The handout that I provided you on about page 10 starts talking about some of the environmental progress that has been made. Many of my colleagues in the room here today and us and many of our members came together a couple of years ago to form the Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition. This coalition has been remarkable in bringing the industry together to promote best practices that has really resulted in tangible results in reducing methane emissions and the reduction of flaring in Texas. In fact, the capture rate as identified by the Railroad Commission of Texas is well in excess of 99% today. And that goes much farther beyond the reduction in drilling that's occurred. It's gone because there's been a dedicated focus of companies to reduce methane emissions and reduce flaring, and the results are impressive, and they're only going to get better as industry continues to employ new technologies. In fact, some results that have occurred because of the industry's commitment to continued environmental progress are remarkable. Carbon dioxide emissions are at 30-year lows. Methane emission rates dropped nearly 70% between 2011 and 2019. The U.S. has reduced aggregate emissions of the 6 criteria air pollutants by 73% since 1970. So these are remarkable accomplishments, and industry is committed to even doing more. As you think about doing more and looking toward the future, I'm here to tell you that innovation and technology are the real ways that our energy needs are going to be met. Oil and natural gas will play a strategically important and dominant role in meeting our energy needs in the years ahead. While we're doing that, we also are going to deliver a lower emissions product and work toward a lower emissions and lower carbon future. Carbon capture, use, and storage is going to be the predominant way that that's going to be met. And there are some policy considerations before you this session that I think you'll be looking at on ways to help kickstart that and to get that going so that carbon capture can become even more than it's been in enhanced oil recovery in the past. And we're excited about that. We know that energy reliability is important. We certainly found out that as a reminder this last week. Energy density is important, where you get that energy from and what it delivers to consumers. And then the last thing about moving forward is really, I think tax policy is important. People can invest their dollars anywhere in the world today and produce oil and natural gas. We want Texas to continue to be the energy capital of the world, and we can do that with the smart policies. I think we support a well-funded Railroad Commission and Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We appreciate the job that our regulators do. It's extremely important to have high standards, to have accountability, and we do support that funding. I think it's a misnomer that some of the public thinks that industry shies away from regulation. What we shy away from is political science and regulation. We favor sound science, and that's what we'd like to see going forward. And then the last thing is just the importance of infrastructure. I know broadband deployment is important for Texas. Highway growth, telecommunications played a role in the storm about inability to communicate with our crews. Infrastructure and pipelines is equally as important. If we don't grow our infrastructure, if we have impediments to infrastructure growth, you're going to see needs even be met in a worse way than you saw last week. So these are the high points, and thank you for your service. I'll stop and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Staples, very much. And I know we have had conversations since last week, and know that you're going to talk to all the members of your association about best practices moving forward as well, to Representative Reynolds' point. So I just want to thank you and your association and all your members for their commitment in providing that for us as well. Members, any questions for Mr. Staples? Chair recognizes Vice Chair Haro.
Thank you, Todd, for your time, not just last week, but this week as well, obviously. But any projections or any information that you can share with the committee as it relates to Eagle Ford Shell or some of these other shells that dropped in production, and whether or not, if and when we can see them, gearing back up?
Yeah, so every company was impacted to some degree through this storm, and they're deploying a great deal of resources. I'll tell you, it's not a simple process to get a well back into production. You don't just flip a switch and then walk away and there you're going again. You have to walk out each valve, walk out each flow line, and they're in the process of doing that. I don't think any long-term damage has occurred that they won't get back up, to full optimization where they need to. When a well comes back online, when you're producing oil or gas, you get a lot of different products that comes up out of the ground that has to be separated. That associated gas from an oil well, or even a lot of times gas from a gas well, just can't be put into that pipeline and to get it to a power generator. There has to be processes to get those impurities out. And so, as the coalition on methane and flaring has adopted a goal to end routine flaring by 2030, but when we say routine flaring, we're talking about just not building the infrastructure and pipelines. Flaring does occur when you're getting these wells back online in the Eagle Ford, because if you do not remove the impurities, you will disrupt that transmission process, and then the product never gets to those human needs that were so vital. And so I appreciate you bringing that point up, because it is a process, and you may see some increased flaring while they're getting those impurities out of the system and getting the wells realigned.
Right, and thank you. And that was something I learned over the years, which is, the flares are not something that these refineries and/or producers are wanting, because that's essentially what they're burning away. But those are the impurities. You mentioned the reduction of methane and some of these other emissions. Which policies or practices have you identified as being most effective in reducing, these methane emissions?
There's several steps to it, and on the coalition's website, there's a really good best practices flow chart that identifies the processes that companies go through. But things like leak detection and repair equipment, replacement of valves has been a big factor. Satellite imagery today, and even handheld devices that can be more easily deployable. I mean, it's in everyone's economic best interest to capture every molecule that you can and put it in the supply chain. And so that's the real focus. But these types of technological advances have made a difference. The coalition actually hosted an innovation conference here not too long ago, where companies competed to get on and to tell their story about processes to help, if infrastructure is not available on site, what type of new technology might be available to help capture that gas. And so it's a moving process. It's not a one and done step. Technology is really what has made us competitive globally, and what will continue to make us competitive is being a step ahead of others around the world, and they're going to continue to look at these types of elements.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Todd, I always value your testimony, and you've been very insightful as well, and gave a lot of good time and information throughout the joint hearing. And I like your comment that you made based on science and not political science. And I think that is really the crux of where we should be, using the experts and really not politicizing any of this, but based on science. So to that end, one of the things that came up, at least during some aspects of the hearing last week from several of the people that testified, was that perhaps there should be a aspect of looking at climate change as a possible factor in some of the recent incidents and reoccurring frequency of these major weather changes that we've had that were before considered 100-year events that were more frequent: droughts, floods, Harvey, this incident that we had recently with the winter storm. What is your perspective when you talk about, science and looking at, climate?
I think our member companies are committed to making environmental progress and addressing the concerns about our climate. We know that different individuals and different companies and different scientists have different opinions about frequency and causation and weather patterns. And so rather than trying to get caught up into determine who's 90% right here and 40% right there, our member companies are focused on what they do best, and that is use technology and innovation to deliver a product. Natural gas is the reason the world's air quality is cleaner today. Natural gas is the reason that the United States has made the great progress that we have in the lower emissions that I talked about earlier. And so I think our companies are really looking at how can we continue to deliver a product and to lower those emissions. And whether it's think tanks, environmental groups, NGOs, or the industry is looking at how can we lower our emissions profile. And that's why you've seen a lot of our production go to electrification for the pumps rather than generators. And so we're going to continue regardless of the degree. I think we all recognize the climate changes, and I think we all recognize we manage the climate better because of oil and gas. I mean, we're in conditioned space today thanks to power sources that help us to condition our environment around us. And so we're committed to making that progress. I think it's important that we have a rational conversation about the causation, about what occurred last week, and we're going to be delivering to you all some comments that we're working on as I speak that we think will be useful to you as you consider a path forward here.
And one final question. I think it's all of us have seen the scrutiny that Texas is under, not just in the state but across the world, and we're the energy capital and the crisis that we endured. How is your association, basically, combating the I would say the deterioration of the confidence that some people have in our energy industry as a result of the failures to address the weather changes that led to the power outages? How is your association? Are you doing messaging? Are you doing stuff to rebuild the confidence that the public has lost, in some respects? And just curious of your opinion on that.
Yeah. Are you referring to the specifics of the outage of power and how we're going to address those issues and
Yes.
give the confidence that it's okay to bring your next factory to Texas?
Yes.
That kind of thing?
Yes.
Yeah, I think going through and doing the forensics of the causation at each step of the supply chain is an important part of that. We've identified in the oil and gas sector that we're going to work to make certain that the critical load designations for the segments that are applicable to be designated as critical load is occurring. We're making certain that the orders on the prioritization of who gets gas is very clear to a provider, so that when your first prioritization is met for human needs, then you can pivot automatically and go to the next set of prioritization. There won't be any hesitation there because there needs to be clarity based on the types of questions that we encountered during the storm. We're working on those kinds of things. But I think we have the power that we need. I think it just wasn't available for a variety of reasons. And this is not a systemic problem. This is one that can be fixed. I think there's going to be necessary legislative changes. But I think the world should know that Texas is reliable. We're going to make certain that people have the power they need, and we're going to address our environmental concerns all along the way.
That's great, because I know we're resilient, but I know our brand has been tarnished, and we have to be transparent and realistic about that. I mean, the elephant in the room is there were some major catastrophic problems, but we're resilient and we're going to recover. And I think your association will help us go a long way. We do it from the policy side, but just like you were just about that Wednesday, I think you were going to have Energy Day, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and so no, that's been postponed, but that we need to rebuild our brand. That's basically the bottom line, and we're looking for all our stakeholders like you and others to help us do that. So thank you.
Thank you. We're committed to that process.
Thank you, Representative Reynolds. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr.
Great.
Chairman.
Thank you for everything. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Ed Longenecker. How are you?
Doing well, how are you?
Good.
Good morning, Chairman Goldman, committee members. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Ed Longenecker, and I serve as president of the Texas Independent Producers and Royalty Owners Association, or TIPRO for short. TIPRO was founded in 1946, and this year is our 75th anniversary of continuous operations serving the Texas oil and gas industry. And just some insight to who we represent within the oil and gas sector. Today, we represent nearly 3,000 members. Those members include large and small operators, mineral owners, and service-oriented companies. Our membership includes the top 10 largest producers in the state of Texas, but the majority of our members are small businesses. And the upstream side of our membership produces nearly 90% of the oil and natural gas in the state of Texas. And our mission is simple: to protect the ability to responsibly develop oil and natural gas in our state. And much like any association, we offer regular communication with or for our members, with the media, and also with elected officials, as well as data, analysis, and a variety of publications that we provide throughout the year. As an example, just last month, we released our annual State of Energy report, which examines the economic impact of the U.S. oil and gas industry in terms of employment, wages, payroll, businesses, and we also provide data on demographics, production, rig count, and other areas of specific focus for our organization and industry. And if I may, I just wanted to provide a couple of data points from that report to help quantify and reinforce why the Texas oil and gas industry is so important to the state economy. And I know that's going to be a common theme today, most definitely. But Mr. Staples mentioned the direct employment number for the Texas oil and gas industry. We have a similar approach and methodology. And I would say that once you factor in the direct, indirect, and induced multipliers for that employment, and this is all outlined in our report, Texas oil and gas supported 2.3 million workers in our state this past year. Also not surprising, Texas had the highest oil and gas payroll in the country with $45 billion. And we led the country once again in oil and gas production with 1.73 billion barrels of oil produced last year, 10.4 trillion cubic feet of gas. And to put that into perspective, that's about 40% of total oil output in the United States and around 25%, that's 40% and 25% of total natural gas production this past year. Also, an interesting data point is the gross regional product for the Texas oil and gas industry. And this is essentially GDP for a region of study. That number was $278 billion last year, or 15% of the Texas economy. And if you factor in the typical multiplier of 2.4% that we all use, that number more than doubles. And along those lines as well, it's an interesting data point in our report. The Texas oil and gas industry purchased U.S. goods and services last year in the amount of $198 billion. But 82% of that amount came from Texas businesses. So this includes buying oil and gas, hotels, car rentals, and so on. And we have a breakdown of every dollar spent by the Texas oil and gas industry at the national level and also at the state level, over 900 different industry sectors. And we affected or we supported virtually every one of them. So those are just some data points that I wanted to share today from our report. We can customize data for this committee if it's of interest related to our industry or other industries that might be prominent in your district. We can break it down at the district level, county, metro, or state level, and we'd be happy to do that if there is a need with your offices. Also hope that you'll consider and your staff will consider participating in our oil and gas education briefing. It's something we do every legislative session. This year it will be done virtually on March 25th, 9:30 a.m. to 12 noon. And we will be talking about everything from how oil and gas is formed to exploration and production methods, including hydraulic fracturing, to refining and distribution. So if there are any particular issues that you would like us to focus on during that presentation, we'd be happy to incorporate them, and certainly you'll have the ability to ask questions during that webinar as well. So that's a snapshot of who we are as an organization and the important industry that we represent, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a little information today, and certainly your leadership as it was expressed before last week and in general, and we look forward to working with your offices this year on issues that pertain to oil and gas.
Great. Thank you very much. Members, any questions? I think you told us all that we need to know.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate your time. Thanks for coming here today. Chair now calls Jason Moglin. Sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Thank you for being here.
My name is Jason Modulin, representing the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. On behalf of our chairman, Cy Wagner of Fort Worth, Cooper Oil and Gas, and our over 2,600 members, thank you for the opportunity to be here and testify before this committee. The Texas Alliance of Energy Producers is a statewide trade organization focused on independent operators, particularly small and family-run businesses. We represent all segments of the upstream oil and gas sector, from drillers, contractors, to operators and affiliated industries in between. We became a statewide organization in 2000 after the merger of two regional organizations in 2000, originally based in Abilene and Wichita Falls. It's an honor to be before you today. I wanted to give kind of a recap of the Alliance work so that you knew what we do in this space, also where our focus is this session, and then just give you incredible context for what's happened over the past decade in Texas oil and gas. It's really been a remarkable story that has occurred because of the leadership of this committee and of the state legislature. We generate some unique products, and I'll put those before you on your desk. The Texas Petro Index, which is generated by our petroleum economist Carl Ingham, tracking the economic indicators of the upstream oil and gas business in the state of Texas, whether it's rig count, WTI prices, direct employment in the upstream space. So have that before you, and really 2020 was a remarkable year in the amount of devastation that occurred due to demand loss. Nearly 60,000 direct jobs in the state of Texas were lost. That's despite there being overwhelming production numbers up until March of 2020, when we really set an all-time record. Going off EIA numbers, excuse me, sir, 5.4 million barrels a day. Truly remarkable numbers, and really exceeded the 1970s level records that we had before. Ed mentioned 40% of U.S. production. We think by the year's end it'll be closer to 44%. Really seeing devastation in other parts of the country, and Texas continuing to lead and excel. I also put before you the produced water white paper that we produced after last session, really highlighting the tremendous advances that are happening in the Texas oil and gas space on recycling and the use of produced water to really advance and create some beneficial uses for that water. 8.5 billion barrels of produced water is produced annually in the state of Texas, and Chairman King, that might translate to about 1 million acre feet a year of new water that we could take advantage of if we can find economical and technologically feasible ways to treat that water and get it to beneficial use. So we want to continue to work with you and your committee to advance the ball there. Our priorities this session have been budget. I've been living in finance and House Appropriations the past 2 days, advocating for the Railroad Commission, but also the TCEQ and the UT Bureau of Economic Geology, 3 critical agencies that we rely on in the oil and gas industry here in the state of Texas to advance. Chairman Darby, thank you for your work on TexNet and continuing to advance the mission there at UTBEG. Chairman Craddock laid it out very well this morning, just the IT advances and really the champions in this committee making sure that we have the resources to be able to act quickly. When the agency was shut down during COVID, their inspectors, their employees were able to continue operating and continue to make those high metrics on inspections. So we're very grateful for that. And then finally, I just want to touch on the incredible progress made the last decade We went from, in 2009, nearly 1 million barrels a day to March 2020 when it was 5.4 million barrels a day of oil production. Truly incredible numbers. And when the oil export ban went away in 2015, that created the strong demand across the state to get product out of the field into our ports so that it could be exported around the world. We've seen tremendous progress at the Port of Corpus Christi, Chairman Herrera stepping away, of just the incredible output. The Port of Corpus Christi exports 50% of all U.S. Oil production to go around the world. And we want to work with you and just so appreciate being invited today. And thank you, Amanda, and happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Thank you Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. And you mentioned Cy Wagner, not only in full disclosure, not only is he my constituent, he's also my neighbor. So thank him and thank you both for your leadership. Members, any questions? Nope. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming today and for your testimony. Chair now recognizes Eddie Trevino. Thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome.
I don't have to tell any of y'all to follow the procedures because y'all have done this so many times, you know the procedures.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for allowing me.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Trevino, can you just move a little closer to the microphone or bend it down a little? Yeah, perfect.
Bring it
Thank
to
you.
me. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the organization that I represent, which is the State Energy Conservation Office, also known as SECO. My name is Eddie Trevino. I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I am also the director of SECO. We are housed in the Comptroller's Agency, and what I'm going to do today is provide to you an overview of our services and the resources that we have. You should have in front of you a slide deck, or a hard copy of a slide deck that I'm going to go through. This should take about 10 minutes. If you have any questions while we go through the slide deck, feel free to ask the question and stop me in my tracks, and I'll be happy to address the questions. So I'm going to go to page 2 of the slide deck, which is an overview of our SECO operations. I'll talk about our mission statement, our major focus areas, and our work as a state-level program conduit for the Department of Energy. First, our mission statement. We're here to increase the efficient use of energy and water at public facilities while at the same time protecting the environment. Our office is one of 56 state and territory state energy offices in the country. We're focused on public sector facilities and infrastructure. We work on public entity properties, saving energy and water. So we're on the customer side of the meter. We're between the meter and the building. We do not work or play on the generation or transmission side of properties. Our major focus areas are technical assistance, emerging clean energy technology, training and education, and also energy and water efficiency project financing. Like I said before, we are a state-level program conduit for the Department of Energy. That's through our state energy program. And we also have 2 federally funded contracts, one for the Pantex plant. I'll get into that one a little bit later in the presentation. And the second one is associated with the waste isolation pilot plant. On page 3, you'll find our statutory authorization. For the State Energy Conservation Office, we are authorized under Texas Government Code 447. We work with a lot of oil overcharge restitution funds, which were settlement funds from the late 70s associated with the oil embargo. And that's in Texas Government Code 2305. We also are responsible for energy codes for residential and commercial, as well as state-funded buildings. And that is in a combination of the Health and Safety Code 388 for the residential, multifamily, and commercial energy codes, and Texas Code, Government Code Chapter 447 associated with building standards for state-funded buildings and major renovation projects. We are a fiscal program within the Comptroller of Public Accounts. Our agency number is 907, and in the General Appropriations Act, you can find us in Riders 9 and 10. On slide number 4, as I said earlier, we're part of the Comptroller of Public Accounts, and we're located within the Data Analysis and Transparency Division. We have a staff of 8, which consists of contract managers, financial analyst. We have an engineer who's also an energy manager. And through contracts, support service contracts, we have contracts with professional service companies and also with companies that provide training services for us as well. On slide number 5, we'll talk about our major programs. We have 2 major programs. They are the State Energy Program and the Pantex Program. Within the State Energy Program, we have the Lone Star Revolving Loan Program. I'll get into more details on that program later. We have the Technical Assistance Program, an Emerging Energy Technology Program, and also an Energy Training and Education Program. Within Pantex, we have an agreement in principle for the Pantex plant and also a program called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant Program as well. On slide 6, you'll see that we are responsible for adopting energy design standards for state-funded buildings. This is in Government Code 447.004, and that is where we adopt the minimum energy and water conservation design standards for new state-funded buildings and also for state-funded major renovation projects. We also are responsible for the adoption of high-performance sustainable building design standards for state-funded buildings. With respect to residential and commercial energy codes, that's covered in Health and Safety Code 388.003. We are the delegated authority to adopt by rule the latest published edition of the International Residential Code, and that's Chapter 11, which covers energy efficiency, and also the International Energy Conservation Code, and that's for multifamily and commercial buildings in the state. On slide 7, we'll give you an example of the work that we provide to help other public entities. We have contracts with professional service companies to provide preliminary water and energy assessments at the publicly owned facilities. Could be K-12 schools, could be local governments, county governments, or higher education institutions. And what you see in the list below is the process that we use to conduct and complete a preliminary energy assessment. And of course, it always starts with the baseline. You have to get the baseline. All of our professional engineers do visit the sites, and as they conduct their walk through the sites, they're looking for ways to not only improve or optimize mechanical operations, they're also looking for ways to optimize operations to maintain facilities and make them the most energy efficient using the staff and personnel that are present on site. Where they see replacement project potential, they'll provide preliminary cost estimates, which includes the materials and installation, and then they'll also let us know what the energy savings could result from making these types of capital upgrades. From the energy savings and the cost, then the recipient will understand how long, in terms of simple payback, if they decide to move forward with the project, how long it would take to pay for itself, and then how long they would have the benefit of that project after the project has been paid for. We also provide implementation support in 2 areas. Number 1, if there is a state agency that is going to utilize energy savings performance contracting as a contracting methodology for an energy efficiency project at their facilities, we will review and approve those contracts before that agency enters into a formal agreement with the ESCO, or the Energy Savings Company. We also have project financing. That's through our Lone Star program. You'll see that the STAR stands for Saving Taxes and Resources. And in the next couple of slides, I'll give you an overview of that program. So we're on slide 8. This is a low-interest revolving loan program, and it's for financing energy and water efficiency projects at public facilities. It's a 2% interest rate, which is pretty low, and we actually go up to 15 years on our loan payback, and we have an $8 million maximum loan amount per loan. An agency or public entity also has the ability to apply for up to 3 loans during an open application period. So that gives them, if they break their project up into 3 distinct projects, the ability to leverage $24 million. Our loan fund is capitalized with the remaining oil overcharge fund. It's grown to $134 million to date, and also with stimulus funds that were rolled into our loan program, and that's $84 million. It's self-serving. What you're doing, or what the entity is doing, is they've got a utility budget, and they're redirecting a portion of their utility budget to pay for capital improvement projects. So it's not an out-of-pocket expense for the agency or the borrower. They're just redirecting those dollars from their budget to pay for capital improvement. So it's a win-win for everybody, and for the borrowers and for the recipients, because not only do they get a lower utility bill, they also get an improved working environment, or in the case of students, an improved learning environment. On the next slide, I'll give you an overall recap of where we are to date with the program. We manage the funds in-house. We've actually executed 326 loans for a total of $548 million in loans. You can see that the major recipient of the loans are public school districts and local governments, 232 loans, and then we've executed 81 loans to state agencies and public higher education institutions. The average payback period on a loan is 11.8 years. And on the savings to date, one thing that I'll point out with this particular loan program, it's been in existence since 1990. We've never had a default in the history of the program. It's my job to make sure that I'm not the first one that does. And so we're going to do our dead level best to make sure that these loans are using our professional service companies, that they keep track of the activities on the loans to protect our interest. We have restrictive investment grade quality audit requirements, and so that have been proven to be successful as well. So to date, savings are $698 million associated with these loans, and 5.8 billion kilowatt hours of energy savings as well. You can see also that we have natural gas savings and chill water savings shown on the list as well. Finally, in our other program, which is the pantex program, we have an agreement in principle with the pantex program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the pantex program. This is the place where they disassemble all of the nuclear weapons. And so we have a partnership with the Department of Energy to protect health and human environment and the environment around the pantex plant. And we do this through environmental oversight, sampling and analysis of water, through emergency planning and coordination, and also training of emergency responders in the case of an incident. You can see that we also have many partners that participate in this particular program. That includes TCEQ, TDM, the Department of State Health Services, Carson County, Armstrong County, the City of Amarillo, and also Potter and Randall counties. With the waste isolation pilot plant, what that program is, that's the coordination for shipment of transuranic, that's low-level radioactive waste that has to go from other places where nuclear weapons and other types of radioactive materials is being shipped to Carlsbad, New Mexico, to the waste isolation project plant. And when it gets shipped through Texas. And so what this program does is a coordination of emergency responders for shipment of this waste. And what they're doing is training local responders in the shipping route. They're going through emergency planning exercises. And then they're also tracking these shipments to make sure that nothing happens between their point of origin and to the point of ultimate destination, which is the waste isolation project plant. So that's my overview, fast and furious. Thank you. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Trevino. Thank you very much for that very thorough presentation. We greatly appreciate it. Members, any questions? Representative Darby?
Thank you, Eddie. Can you give us an update on the PACE program, the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program that your agency oversees?
The Property Assessed PACE program is for commercial entities. It's not for any publicly owned entities. I know that there are 2 PACE providers that are the major providers of all of those programs. The local governments are still in the process of individually adopting PACE as a program and adopting administrators. I know that out of all of the counties, the focus is still on the major population areas. I've been keeping up through my predecessor, Dub Taylor, on the program, and he said that so far it's moving forward. There is adoption happening. There are projects that are happening, and so it continues just to, it's a matter of getting the word out and letting the local and county governments, start adopting the programs locally.
Well, are you kind of the central processing place for analysis of those programs? And
We are
at
not.
some point, I guess we're going to have to weigh in as a legislature on the program, see how effective it is, see if it's doing what we wanted it to do and the effects of that. So I was just wondering, is your agency, is there a report that we can see or that you can get back with the committee on?
No, sir, there is no report at this point. Where we are involved right now is with the PACE technical guidelines. And so just like on our Lone Star technical guidelines where you try to provide a uniform criteria for everybody to follow, we are updating those PACE technical guidelines right now to give to the Texas, Keeping Pace in Texas, so that they can spread that word out and try to get those adopted by everybody as well.
Okay. Thank you, Eddie.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Representative Darby. Let the record reflect that Representative Vanchia is now here and present. Chair recognizes Speaker Craddock.
Glad to have you. I've got several questions. Can we talk about your budget? What is your budget from the state?
Our budget is, this year with the 5% reduction was $397,000.
I'm sorry.
$397,000 GR, and it was $418,000 in FY '20.
Okay, and what are the number of employees?
We have 8 employees. What we do with that budget is with our state energy program, we have a match requirement for our federal funding, and so we use that budget to help us meet our match requirement for the federally funded Department of Energy contract.
Okay, I was interested in your talking about the facility up in the Panhandle, Pantex,
Yes, sir.
and what you do when if you move, I guess it's low-level waste to a storage facility, is that correct?
There are 2 separate projects. The one, Pantex, is actually a standalone project with other state agencies to protect the environment and prepare for emergencies should there be a problem at the Pantex plant. That's one contract. The second contract, the Waste Isolation Project plant, is carrying low-level radioactive waste from a point of origin to the waste isolation plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And what we do is that when that low transuranic waste is what it's called, when it's carried through the state of Texas, we make sure that it's safely transported through Texas.
Okay, that's the part I'm interested in.
Yes,
Okay. Tell me, what do you do to make it safe?
On the The focus is the training of local emergency responders along the shipping route. We also have emergency planning for all communities along the shipping route, should there be an emergency. And then, in addition to that, we track all of the shipments so that at all times, everybody knows where the shipments are.
Is that only for Pantex?
That is for the waste isolation project plant. That's the ultimate destination because that's the low-level waste. So it goes for any shipment that is associated with that low-level radioactive waste. It tracks all of those.
What about?
With Pantex?
I'm sorry, excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What about the facility in Andrews?
The Pantex plant?
No, the low-level waste facility in Andrews.
I can get that information for you. I'm not familiar with the status of that right now. We are not involved in that level at that project, I believe, but I'll check and find out for you for sure.
So you're not involved with the safety of the transportation of the low level going through the West Texas area of the state?
To Andrews, we are involved as it comes through and it goes to Carlsbad, New Mexico. I will get the information for you if that includes Andrews or not.
Okay, because I'd like to know kind of what you do to make that, to protect it, make it a safe travel, and I'm just interested in the safety that you're providing, I guess, would be the question. Because if you're providing for one area of the state, what happens if there's a facility somewhere near Houston, or what happens if there's one in East Texas or West Texas or Dallas, or you're not doing anything with anything up there, right?
Most of these are through the Department of Energy, so that they would be dictating the routes that we would be covering because the contract is with them. So whether it's with those other routes or not, I'd have to find out. If that includes those, I'd have to find out for you.
But it's through a state agency, correct?
It is through the State Energy Conservation Office, yes.
Okay, and what does the state pay of that part of your agency's benefits that you provide?
I believe this is completely federally funded.
It's what?
Federally funded. This is through the Department of Energy funding only.
Okay.
It's a single source fund, and that's federal, and that's the Department of Energy that pays for both of those contracts.
Okay, well, I would like to have the answers to the other, if you could provide them to the chairman.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. We greatly appreciate it. The Chair now recognizes Judith Talavera. Good afternoon. Or is it morning still? 2 minutes till the afternoon. So good morning.
I just changed my remarks.
Okay.
Morning to afternoon. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Judith Talavera, and I'm the president and COO of AEP Texas. Good to see some of you again. First, let me say that my heart goes out to all of those who were impacted by the severe winter events 2 weeks ago. I know that it was a difficult time for many people across the state, and I commit to you that AEP Texas is here to be a part of the solution, and we will be. You heard from Encore and Centerpoint last week during the joint hearing. Like them, AEP Texas is a regulated transmission and distribution utility that delivers power across the ERCOT market. Our service territory is across 97,000 square miles across South and West Texas, and we're headquartered in Corpus Christi, with that really being our largest community that we serve. We're very much a...
And I'm sorry, do you mind moving the microphone a little closer to you?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. You can move it from the base. Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our experience was pretty much identical to what you heard last week from Encore and Centerpoint. We received the first load shed directive from ERCOT about 1:20 in the morning on February the 15th. I'm certainly happy to go through it in more detail with you, but I don't want to repeat, a lot of what you've already heard. Early the week of February 8th, we began preparing for a severe weather event that was projected for later in the week. We reviewed our system. We brought back lines that had been out of service due to maintenance. We canceled maintenance projects that were scheduled to be done until after the storm, so we could have our system back in place as much as possible to have as many assets as we could to deliver that power to our customers. So going into the weekend of February the 13th, we felt prepared from an infrastructure standpoint that our system was prepared for the event. While we did have some impact to our system from the severe weather, it was minimal, and we were able to recover quickly from that. I know that some have expressed concerns over the communications that occurred during the event. I can tell you that AEP Texas began communicating on February 10th on social media about the upcoming winter weather, sharing winter storm preparation tips, the information about our storm restoration process, and we communicated in both in English and Spanish on those platforms. When we became aware after meetings with ERCOT that grid conditions might be tight and the possibility of a load shed might be possible Monday and Tuesday, we issued an appeal of conservation to our customers on Saturday, February 13th, and we communicated that there was a potential for emergency-controlled outages. We continue to communicate over the weekend with the public through social media and news releases with the information that we had available to us at the time. We received 12 orders from ERCOT before 8 a.m. Monday morning, and 1 order to restore. We were close to being out of options to shed any more load. AEP Texas has 1,466 circuits on its system. About a third of those are on our load shed list. So let me tell you how we get to that number. Our load ratio share of the ERCOT load is 8.7%. That's based on the summer peak in ERCOT. I think y'all heard that last week. So when ERCOT orders a transmission operator to shed, 1,000 megawatts as an example, AEP Texas sheds 87, right? That's our obligation. So when we look to identify the circuits to place on our load shed list, we first have to look at those that can't be on the list. And basically we have 3 buckets that we look at, plus 1, and I'll explain that in a minute. So we're required to maintain 25% of our load off the load shed list for under frequency protection. That's roughly about a third of our circuits. So special equipment is placed at each of those circuits, and it's programmed. If the frequency of the system drops below a certain level, they're designed to automatically open and protect the system. The next bucket is smaller, but not by much, and it includes those circuits that we'll call the do not touch list, right? So gas compressor stations, underground networks. We have 3 of those in the AEP system, in Victoria, Laredo, and Corpus Christi. Distributed generation facilities that by ERCOT protocols we're not allowed to drop, which makes sense, right? You're trying to keep all the generation that you can on the system at a time like that. We worked proactively with our communities to identify warming centers that were being set up and proactively removed those circuits off the list on Sunday so they wouldn't be impacted. So that leaves us with the circuits available to be on the load shed list. These are not easy decisions, but it is how the list of circuits is developed. The one additional bucket that I mentioned is related to our industrial load. So as I mentioned previously, our load share obligation is based on summer peak, and it does include the industrial load on our system. We serve the Coastal Bend area, Port of Corpus Christi, a lot of industrial load on our system. But we do not impact transmission level industrial customers during a load shed event. We do not, AEP Texas. So that obligation has to be shared by the rest of the customers on our system. I will say, though, that the industrials, I think, did a good job throughout the event, and they curtailed, themselves trying, to be helpful as this emergency event was taking place. We shed the entire list of circuits on our load shed list that Monday. We didn't have any flexibility on our system to rotate outages. I know this has been a big area where there have been a lot of questions as well. Believe me, we never want to find ourselves in a situation or a scenario of this magnitude where we have no flexibility left. We drill for these events. As we plan for these events, you think that maybe you'll go a quarter down the list, maybe halfway down the list, worst case scenario, and it leaves you flexibility to bring these people on and take these people off and rotate the outages. We did not have that flexibility just due to the lack of generation on the system. When we did have the opportunity, when we got a little bit of light, right, to bring some load back on, our focus was on restoring service to any critical accounts that we may have impacted. At peak, we had approximately 468,000 outages on our system. As additional generation started coming back online, more Wednesday, and we started receiving those orders to restore from ERCOT, our teams were ready. We restored service to about 200,000 customers throughout the day on Wednesday, and our crews worked through the night, and we were able to restore service to an additional 150,000 customers overnight on Wednesday. We had brought in additional resources to help with restoration efforts because we knew there might be some challenges just given the length of time that people had been out of power. And really at this time, our focus, we were trying to bring back the people who had been impacted the longest, with the first opportunities that we had. I will say that, on Wednesday is that the certainty was there a little bit more from ERCOT. We were seeing more generation starting to come back on the system. So our focus was just a lot broader. It wasn't necessarily on rotating. It was just bringing back people who had been out of service. We restored service to 95% of everyone impacted by the end of day Thursday and 99% by end of day Friday. We had a few outages that did go into Saturday, but I will say that that was mostly due to access issues and being able to access our facilities. I know there have also been a lot of questions about communications efforts throughout this, and in particular between the electric and gas industries and opportunities to identify those critical locations for the natural gas generators. AEP Texas has been an active participant in the Gas Electric Working Group that was established in 2019. It serves as a forum for that coordination to happen between the two industries, and a process was developed for the TDUs to receive that information from the gas industry. We received information from one entity identifying 10 sites on our system. It impacted 4 circuits. We removed those circuits from the load shed list, and they were not impacted during the event. As we were going through the event, another 20 sites were identified, and we worked quickly to get power to those if they had been impacted. They weren't necessarily impacted by the load shed. We did have severe weather, out there as well, but we responded quickly and brought those back online just as quickly as we could. And we're reviewing our system to make sure that they're not included in the load shed list moving forward. Finally, I would like to recognize our AEP Texas team and the additional resources who came to help us. We received assistance from PSO, our sister company out of Oklahoma, from Texas New Mexico Power, one of our fellow TDUs here in the state, and hundreds of contractors who came to assist us. Our folks were ready to get out there and start restoring power just as soon as we got the orders to do so, and there was enough generation back on the system. So what we do, candidly, there was a lot of frustration with our employees, just with it being out of our control, right? This wasn't a situation where you had poles and wires down following a hurricane. So I want to thank them, and I also want to thank our customers, because even through very difficult situations for them, they were very gracious to our employees as they encountered them out there restoring service. So I really want to tell our customers how much we appreciate them through all of this. So, Mr. Chairman, I think you and members of the committee, and you mentioned this earlier, have asked for feedback on maybe possible solutions or ideas that we may have. I'll tell you that we're working with our fellow TDUs, and we'll be bringing some ideas, forward to you. But thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it, and happy to be here.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate you being here, and you touched on something that I know I was remiss on last week in not mentioning, and you mentioned it, and I'd like to mention it now. I have mentioned in times like we had 2 weeks ago, ordinary people do extraordinary things. And the men and women who work for you and the men and women who came from all over the nation to help us restore power and worked out in the freezing cold weather and temperatures, and I'm sure worked many, many, many long hours, many going without sleep to literally restore power out there across our state. Our thanks goes out to those people because they did an extraordinary job in extraordinary times. So thank you to all, not only your employees who were out there in the field doing that, but certainly to all the others from across the state, and especially all those who came from out of state to help us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll just share with you all, too, that Jeff Strassner is with me in the audience, and he's our vice president over our distribution operations, and those crews all report to him, and they were doing a great job.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And please share our thanks to all of them. Just 2 points I'd like to make, and then certainly welcome to have any questions. You touched upon this a little bit, but I want to go a little bit further. In the critical infrastructure list, y'all have such a list. Are y'all the keepers of such list? And then how does one, for lack of a better word, apply to be on such a list, and how do they get approval for that?
Well, it depends on the type of customer that you are, right? So there is a form, and if you're an individual, right, critical care customer that has been established by the commission, a number of years ago, they get that information through their retail electric provider, but the information is submitted to us so that it can be noted on our system.
So if someone is on oxygen and had to go through the process, how does that happen? If a widow or widower is on oxygen and they live alone and they need to make sure that their power is not cut off, so they remain to have their oxygen work and run.
Right, and this is subject to check, but if I remember correctly, there is a form that they can fill out. They ask their retail electric provider for the information. Their retail electric provider provides them that. They have to take it to their doctor and get sign-off from their medical doctor that they are, they require this type of.
Are they informed of that? Do you know, are they informed of that by their doctor? Are they informed that by their retail provider, or are they just supposed to know that on their own?
I don't know, sir, what kind of visibility
Okay.
or communication the retail provider
Yeah.
has with their customer.
No, I think that's one takeaway, that so many people, I mean, that's one of the most horrific stories I've heard, is all these people that had oxygen, their electricity was turned off, and,
Right.
and
I will say, though, as well, and it's a difficult, situation. I do recognize that. But it's one of the reasons that we really try to get communication out there, because we cannot guarantee service will not be interrupted at all.
Right.
Things happen. I mean, Mother Nature happens. So we put information out there like the.
So you hit on a point, sorry to interrupt you, but you're on my second point, communication. How do y'all communicate to your customers? And I know Mr. Nye at Encore and I had a long discussion of that, not only during the hearing, but prior to the hearing. What systems do y'all have in place to communicate to the people who receive power from you, especially in times of a blackout? Is there a system in place?
So I appreciate the question. As the transmission and distribution utility, the end-use customer is not our direct customer, right? So we may not necessarily have their contact information. Personally, I think that's an area that we could improve upon, because I would love to be able to share information directly with that customer. And we provide all the news releases, all the information we're putting out there to the retail providers. I have no visibility into
Right.
what they communicate
Right.
to their customers. So we're left with communicating through regular media. We issue press releases, and we post on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and try to communicate that way. I will tell you that We also, we do have an app. We do have mobile alerts.
And this came up during the hearing, I'm not worried about the younger generation getting their information that way. It's my elderly who live in my constituent, and all of us who have elderly, how are they supposed to get the message? How are they
Right,
supposed to
so
get
it
the
is
word?
very much a concern of ours, as well, and that's why I think the more entities who have that information,
Right.
it's greater benefit
Right.
For the end-use consumer, because we can certainly try and put information out there, proactively. I will tell you that we try to reach people by phone to tell them that we were restoring service, with the ask to reduce some of those heavy, users that were pulling on the system, so that restoration could happen more smoothly for the phone numbers that we had,
Yeah,
and we did do that during the week, but we didn't reach all million customers,
yeah,
that are on our system.
right. And because you don't have their information.
Because we don't have their information, email, they have to proactively reach out to us.
Right.
To give it to us.
Right.
We run commercials and we run requests and, but it still has to
Sure.
be from them.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Members, Chairman King?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today, Judith, and appreciate your testimony. And I just wanted to follow up on that communication things. I know that all the energy providers, the TDUs, is that what you are?
We're a
Transportation
TDU, Transmission and
Distribution Unit,
Distribution.
or
Yes,
is
sir.
that what it stands for? Yeah. And the state would love to be able to communicate to the public and everything, and as would the generators and the retailers. And obviously, the retailers are in a good position to do it also, in the best position from an industry standpoint. But candidly, in my view, that's one of the biggest failures we had was the lack of communication. And even if we had sounded a false alarm in hindsight, obviously, which is always 2020, would have been better to sound a false alarm than the almost no alarm that we did do. But there's only a couple of people in the state of Texas with a big enough microphone to get to the elderly and the older folks that don't have access to the apps and all those kinds of things. And not to cast any blame anywhere, but I mean, realistically, in spite of everything that you might want to do or that anybody in the industry would want to do, you just don't have a big enough microphone to cast that message that should have been cast in hindsight the week prior to that. So that was just my comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Members, any other questions? Representative Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman King pretty much addressed some of the questions that I had. And Judith, I want to thank you for your testimony today. And I was interested in hearing it from the initial hearing, but I know that Centerpoint and Encore did testify. But my question is, and you believe that your members' hands were tied because there's really not a system in place that gives your members the information to contact the customers. We established that, correct?
Right.
And more than likely, that's going to be one of the challenges that the legislature has to tackle to give those tools. But my question specifically is, the communication that you did have regarding load shed, that came directly from ERCOT, correct?
The direction and the order, yes, we were
Yes.
ordered by ERCOT to
Right.
shed load, yes, sir.
Correct. And for the edification of those who may be watching via live stream, when they give you those directions, that is mandatory. That's not permissive. It's basically, this is what you have to do, correct?
No, sir, yes, it is not, it is mandatory. It is
Okay.
not permissive, and we have to do it within 30 minutes.
Okay, and so basically, the autonomy then goes to your providers to decide basically the conversation you just had where, in terms of locations, correct? That you take that load from, correct? They don't,
Yeah.
ERCOT doesn't direct you location.
They don't tell us where.
Yes, that's
Correct.
what I just want to establish that, because some people, there's a lot of confusion out
Yes.
there, and we're just trying to clear that up. So they don't tell you where, they just tell you how much.
Correct. They give an order across the board to the transmission operators, and then that is assigned based on the load ratio share.
Correct, and you went through that. So my question is, do you believe, as we look back and we're assessing the lack of communication, and we know that there are impediments, but my question directly to you is, was there ample communication between ERCOT and the PUC and your member organizations?
There were ongoing meetings throughout the week. I guess I don't know ample communications in terms of.
To give you all sufficient notice about the severity of the crisis. We know the general public didn't know. We know the general public didn't get that information, and that's one of the things that we're looking at. But I'm asking you, was there communication between ERCOT and yourself or your associations to give real-time information so that they could then quickly act?
Meetings happen daily, and conversations are happening daily between ERCOT and our operators. I will say that we knew severe weather was coming. We started to become more aware that there might be tightening conditions on the grid that Friday or Saturday, and that there might be a need to shed load. The magnitude was not expected. It was a much smaller number that was thought to be at risk for the difference between the supply that would be there and then the demand that would be on the system.
And one of the other critical things that came out, one of the most astonishing things is that we were approximately 3 minutes and 47 seconds away from going totally black in terms of the grid, correct? Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir. I think about, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that.
And what would have happened if that unfortunate event had happened? What would that have meant to your member or associate organizations?
Oh, devastating for the state. I mean, if, the outages would have continued, uncontrolled, and, the ERCOT system would have gone to blackout, it would have taken weeks or months to bring.
Weeks or
state
months,
back.
that's what I understand, possibly months, correct?
Yes, sir.
And to put that in perspective, that's months without power, without water sources and everything, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And going back on one final follow-up question, we know that we did some autopsies from the last major winter storm in 2011, correct? And
Correct.
and we established some best practices, correct?
Mm-hmm.
When we looked at that. Do you, in winterizing our generators and all of our grids, that was a part of that process, correct?
Those were some of the recommendations or
Okay.
findings.
And to your knowledge, were those recommendations acted upon to prepare for, extreme temperatures?
I can't answer to what the generators may have done or not.
Okay, what about the members that you represent? Do you think that they were prepared based upon those recommendations from the 2011 report?
Yes, so the company that I represent, AEP Texas, we felt our system was prepared, for the event from a winterization standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Reynolds. Chair recognizes Representative Vinchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Talavera, welcome. Glad you're here. I was on the phone this morning with members of the congressional delegation in Texas, and they were asking the very same questions that Representative Reynolds was asking about, sort of fairness of who got taken down and how those decisions are made. So I'm grateful for your testimony today. I wanted to ask you a little bit about industrial, INC, industrial and commercial customers. Do they ever get taken down? Mandatorily taken down, or is it exclusively a voluntary activity?
To my understanding, it's voluntary. I would have to follow up on that.
That's my understanding as well.
It is not we don't do it.
Right.
But there are voluntary programs that they can enter into.
And those voluntary programs are related to ancillary services, demand response, for example, where if the grid operator needs additional capacity, the industrial and commercial operators are able to forego their main activity, their main production activity, whatever it may be, if they're manufacturing or refining, they're able to stop that, so that saves electricity on the grid, right? There's a demand part, and then they're also many of them are also generators of electricity, so they can sell that back onto the grid. Is that your understanding as well?
There are some who do have cogen facilities.
They have cogen facilities, right? And so, do you know? Do you all manage any demand response programs with our industrial and commercial operators?
We do not. We are prohibited from doing so directly under the market structure.
Right. And so that is done by generators, or is it done by ERCOT? ERCOT, right. And would you do so? While we allow commercial and industrials to do demand response, we do not allow residential demand response statewide. Is that right?
There are energy efficiency programs.
Other than energy efficiency programs, right? Where sort of weatherization programs and sort of promotion of rooftop generation and stuff like that. But you can't sort of contract and say, instead of sort of please to go down to 68 degrees because there's an extreme weather event, the grid operator, despite having the technological capability to do so with smart meters, is unable to take a group of residents down to 68 degrees or 65 degrees to preserve the integrity of the grid and potentially not to have to shed so much load, right, and black people out. Is that a tool, do you think, that, while not preventing what happened, would have been useful in this process?
So speaking for my company
Yes.
only, I think that is a tool that would be helpful and we'd be interested in having.
Right. Residential demand response. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Vanchia. Members, any other questions? Vice Chair Ed.
Judith, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And thank you for taking the time, not just today, but in leading up to this hearing and even before last week's hearing. I know AEP reached out to offices, and mine was one of them, so thank you. And as I mentioned to you before, today, a lot of the questions that I still have are not just my own, but also from constituents. And so I waited till the end to see if maybe some of those had already been asked, and some of them have, so I'll try to skip around. But going back to the tools that would be helpful, and the point is that, as I tried to allude last week, ERCOT is looking at the supply, and it's trying to guess what the demand is. And essentially, it's relying on the grid, if you will, to be maintained at the 60 hertz so that the system is not at risk of failing. So, and is this the same tool that you think would be helpful? In other words, if consumers, let's say a person who is at home, and I'm not going to get to the critical care or chronic condition customer, the general public, for them to be able to be made aware of what the circumstances are as they're occurring, or maybe obviously before, and by that I mean ERCOT giving the notice to, let's say, AEP, you need to show, load shed of X megawatts. It's my understanding that that information is not conveyed to the end user. In other words,
The order comes from ERCOT to us.
correct, right. So the order comes from ERCOT to a TDU, such as AEP, but that information is not conveyed, is my understanding, to the end user. right? So my next door neighbor never got notice from a TDU, ERCOT, anyone else for that matter to say, your TDU provider, which happens to be AEP, has been asked to shed load of, 1,500 megawatts. Or does AEP actually communicate that to the end user and say, by the way, we've gotten an order from ERCOT that has told us to shed, this amount, and you may or may not be in this first bucket. And then again, a second time, you may or may not be in the second bucket, or you may or may not be on the third. But at some point, it became where AEP said, everybody is going to have no power.
So we were communicating that we had received orders to shed load from ERCOT. The amount of megawatts probably were not in our communications.
Or even the locations, right?
Well, and it was throughout our system, throughout our entire footprint. But yes, it didn't provide specific, circuits,
Right, so
provide specific.
So if I'm a consumer and I hear AEP's been asked by ERCOT to shed load of, 2,000 megawatts, and AEP says, hey, we've been asked by ERCOT to shed 2,000, that's at your discretion at this point, correct? That AEPs or the TDUs to determine where that shed is going to come from?
We do implement the process and determine the circuits that will be impacted based on our load shed list.
Right, and that load shed list is predetermined, right? In other words, you've got buckets, and
Yes,
you've
sir.
already identified them in the order and priorities and things of that nature. And so depending on how much load each bucket has been designated to shed, you pull, essentially, or you activate that bucket. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it's one specific bucket that contains the load shed list, and the circuits that are on that have different levels of load on them. So depending, the amount we're asked to shed, we start
Right, the
going
point I'm
down
trying to make is that the end user has no idea if and when I'm going to be affected by these load shed orders.
They have no visibility into it, correct.
Right. The other point then is are those load shed buckets merely based on, the ones that produce the most? Or what rhyme or reason is used to identify who's going to be in the first bucket, in this first shed of load?
Well, we have different procedures, but it is a conversation that happens between our operations folks and the people who work in a district. So AEP Texas is divided into 5 districts, right? Corpus Christi District, Rio Grande Valley District, Laredo District, San Angelo, and Abilene District, and cover a lot more territory outside of those major cities. But they sit down and review all of the circuits, recognizing that we have to identify some of them for the under-frequency protection, right? There are some that can't be impacted, like I mentioned earlier, the gas compressor stations and DG, circuits. And
But on that note, when you talk about the low frequency, you're still talking about your whole list of customers, right? In other words, and by looking at all of that, you've identified the first bucket. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, is it geographic, or is it could be anywhere? In other words, what's the analysis that is
it's
used?
all of the above, because it has to be geographically diverse. For the,
So I guess, so is it possible that might explain why I'm on one side of the street in one neighborhood and I have power, but my neighbor literally across the street has no power?
yes, sir, and it's done, based on circuits, and, happy to follow up, and I know we've talked about this, right? Meet with you and go into more detail for your particular district, but it can very much be the case where you have a street, and one side of the street is on one circuit, and another side of the street is on a different circuit.
And so let me go to now to what identified, and I apologize, Judith, that this is not something I contemplated in asking you now, but while we're here, I'm going to. But it's come up in this issue of how people can identify that they are chronic condition or critical care residential customers. And it's an application, and it's from the PUC. And and I won't go into great detail, but I do want to follow up with you on this. But the point is that the way that this application is written, it's the customer fills it out, but then the physician of that customer also has a part to fill out as it relates to their medical care and the necessity of power. But the instructions are that the customer is supposed to fill out the application, give it to their physician, but then it goes on that after that it says that the physician, right, so this is as to the instructions to the physician. After completing page 3 of the following pages, please forward only pages 2 and 3 to the customer's TDU indicated on the form. So what process do you have, AEP have in place in identifying these critical care applicants? And then what is determined whether or not they've satisfied that condition or not?
So we have a process internally, a group who reviews those, accepts those forms as they come in, reviews them, confirms that, there's a signature there from the medical, professional, from the medical doctor, and they get noted on our system. That premise is noted as either critical care or chronic care, and I think they have different time periods that they're, applicable for. And there's a notation in our system.
Right, so then there's a notation in my neighbor, let's assume, is one of those individuals, and let's, for this sake, hypothetical, assume that they've been approved by, and they are, a customer of AEP, right? All right, and they're not put in these buckets, right, as they're going along, but is it a feeder that determines, in other words, the end user? So if I'm, you have 10 customers, and let's assume that they're in order from the transmission line to their in-house. The customer is number 5, right? So does that mean that customers 1, 2, 3, and 4, because you're trying to get power to this other individual, will have power, but everyone beyond that? Or is it that because this individual in this feeder is identified and approved, and let's assume in hypothetical that you don't pull their power, right? That you don't shed their load. Will everyone on that feeder receive power then?
So just a clarification, when we determine the load shed, it is not done by individual customer. We are looking at loads and how much load is needed. So we are looking at our feeders and our circuits. So we will impact an entire feeder. And currently, there's not an ability to, impact this customer, not impact that customer, impact, at that level of granularity. When we're required, or directed to shed load, we have to act very quickly. And, well, there's not the communications infrastructure in place right now to do it by customer, by meter. And timing-wise, I don't know that we could comply, with the time frame, required time frame. But just even stepping back a minute, we don't look at individual customers when we're developing the list. We're looking at those feeders and how much load is on a feeder, which is why our communications, I think, is so important. And I was just, mentioning this a little earlier. When we communicate, and I recognize that not everybody might see it, right? But we do try and make our best effort to let people know that there is severe, weather coming, and recommend that if they do require life-saving equipment or, oxygen or something like that, that they may want to find alternate arrangements.
And staying on this theme, so if my neighbor is approved for this critical care, and is there notice given to them that, hey, you're in bucket number 1, so if we are asked to shed load, you're going to be the first ones to lose power, even though you've got this approval? Or, hey, you're in bucket number 2, so if we get to that point, is there that type of communication at all? Or is it just, hey, everybody out there, we've been asked to shed, 10,000 megawatts, and you may or may not be affected?
Currently, Representative, there is not that level of granularity where we're communicating individually with the customer about what bucket they are on. And I will say that it is a fluid situation, too. It might change, just as the operational needs change from time to time. So saying that they're on this list, today, that might not be the case, 6 months from now or tomorrow. So it's not a hard and fast, place where they'll be identified. I think there's plenty of opportunity to have additional discussions around how to improve communications around this, and we certainly want to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah, and I would welcome that, please, Judith. Going back to Representative Anchia's questions, and you mentioned it as far as, refineries, Port of Corpus Christi, things of that nature in our area. What about businesses in general? Like if I am a car dealership, am I going to be subject to these load sheds as the critical care person? Or am I going to be in the category of the critical infrastructure that, hey, I've got to have my business running and so I need lights on? Or is it just happenstance of where you are and where you are in the grid and what feeder you're on?
I mean, it really does depend on what feeder you're on. I will say, though, that the commission does establish some general guidelines for what constitutes a critical care, load, critical care customer. And I do think there's opportunity for additional conversation around that because it's not, necessarily very specific. I mean, examples are given like hospitals, nursing homes, police stations.
And how often are these lists reviewed?
We review them periodically, try to do it, annually, but we're certainly going to be in the process of, reviewing all of this information as part of this event.
All right. Well, in the interest of time, Judith, I'll follow up with you as you've allowed me to communicate with you and to ask additional questions. And I've got several from constituents, but they're more specific to our area, so I won't take up the members' time.
I'm happy to do so anytime. We'll reach out to your office.
Thank you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one follow-up question that really came to my mind as we talked about communication, and I think is a critical component. One of the misnomers that many of the public were led to believe was that it was rolling blackouts, right? You would acknowledge that. But it wasn't communicated to them that basically the power wasn't going to come back on for an extensive period of time. And so part of the lack of communication was it was communicated that it was rolling blackouts, but that was really a false expectation because rolling blackouts are for a short period of time. So my question to you is, was it ever communicated that initially it may have been rolled out as a rolling blackout, but in fact be aware that it's going to be, we don't know when it's coming back on? Was there ever a follow-up communication? That is the question I want to ask.
Yes, sir. Well, speaking for AEP Texas, from our perspective, we adjusted our messaging on Monday as it became aware that we would not be able to rotate outages as we would have liked to have done. Was the communication clear enough? I don't know. I think maybe we could have done a better job communicating that. But we did change the message and did not use rolling outages and communicated to people that they might be out through the end of the day on Monday or possibly into Tuesday.
Because I think that's the biggest part of the communication. It was basically the miscommunication, and many of my constituents had a false sense of security, and they hunkered down and stayed where if they would have had clarity and more transparency that it was going to be for an extended duration, days, not hours, then they would have left. And that's where the frustration set in, that they were not notified, that they were kept in the dark. And us as legislators, we didn't have that information either. And so I think that is one of the biggest takeaways, that the misnomer of the rolling blackouts were really false expectations that led to people staying when they would have left and went to hotels or other relatives that maybe had power. I mean, so that is just sharing. I'm not blaming, I'm just saying that was really one of the biggest frustrations, is that the communication was rolling blackouts, but the reality was shut down.
Yes, sir, I understand, and I would agree there was a lot of uncertainty during that time, right? We kept hearing generation should ramp back up. We're expecting it to come back, and then it wouldn't. So we were working through the information, right, that we had, and I think there's plenty of lessons learned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Reynolds. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming here today and testifying.
Thank you, members.
Chair now calls Mr. Turi Cannon. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Y'all hear me okay with the mic right there? Okay.
Good enough.
I'm sorry.
I said good enough.
Oh.
Go ahead, Turi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for the opportunity to speak with y'all today. I've worked with many of y'all in the past. I know Dean Craddock and Mr. Guerin and Mr. Anshee have been on this committee a very long time, so it's good to see your faces, and I look forward to working with all the new ones. I'm Turi Cannon. I represent the Texas Pipeline Association. We represent 41 member companies, and which represents solely the interests of intrastate pipelines, meaning the pipelines contained within the border of the state. Our members engage in the business of gathering, transporting, processing, and storing natural gas and natural gas liquids and petroleum products throughout the supply system. You heard Chairman Craddock mention earlier in her presentation that we have over 479,000 miles of pipeline in state. That's total mileage. Just a fun fact that you can share. In 2020, I think my calculations I had, that's enough mileage to go all the way to the moon and back. And we have over 425,000 miles of intrastate lines, which it would encircle the globe about 17 times. We have probably the most extensive, in our opinion, the most extensive and integrated pipeline system in the nation, which serves Texas. But as we all know, Texas is rapidly growing, and we need some more infrastructure to help us meet the demands of the state. We're regulated by the Railroad Commission, the TCEQ, and we've worked hand in hand with those agencies and the legislature over the years to get with sound and consistent policies that are reliable. We're proud of as you heard many of my predecessors before me come back and say about the economic impact of our industry. We approached Dean Craddock's alma mater, Texas Tech University, and commissioned a study to do economic study just for the sole purposes for midstream and what that meant to the state. And the study came back in 2020. It's that at 2019, the pipeline industry alone contributed $48 billion in economic output, and it contributed $2.7 billion in state and local revenues, and it sustained and contributed to 238,000 jobs in the state. I passed out a graphic to you earlier that shows basically the pipeline network. It does a pretty good job of showing how the pipeline system works. At its most fundamental level, pipelines deliver gas from the wellhead meter to the marketplace and the processing plants and the refineries, which further break down the gas stream and make it into the chemicals that we use every day. One pipeline is transporting solely natural gas that goes to industrial users, it goes to generators and less industrial customers, and then storage. And then the other goes to fractionators, which breaks up that gas stream and makes products like butane, propane, and things like that we use every day. And of course, oil pipelines go straight to refineries to make our gasoline and jet fuel. So in conclusion, that's pretty much what a pipeline does, as y'all all know. And so I really appreciate this committee and look forward to working with y'all, and please feel free to reach out anytime we can be of assistance or need information.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. And just to clarify again, I think this was brought up last week, and just to clarify, because this was reported in the media, were there any natural gas pipelines that froze 2 weeks ago?
There were no natural gas pipelines that froze.
Very good. Just wanted to clarify that for everyone who's listening who perhaps thought otherwise. Members, any questions for Mr. Cannon? Representative Guerin?
Terry, thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Although none froze, there was a problem at the compression stations because of a lack of electricity coming to them. Is that correct?
This association was fortunate enough to serve on something called the Texas Energy Reliability Council, which is basically an advisory committee out of the Railroad Commission. And so it includes pipeline companies, members, the PUC, ERCOT was on the phone call, and a lot of electric generators. And during those phone calls that we heard that there were some electricity issues that were occurring at processing plants and on compression stations.
And also there was a number of the operators that had not registered as critical infrastructure, and they didn't even realize they had to. But I think that the state agencies that are probably should get the word out, and the word probably is out now, and because I guess there was 160 of them registered or not overnight, but on the day after Valentine's Day. But I think the associations, both Texoga and Pipeline, could help by making sure that their members realize that they need to be, listed as critical infrastructure so their power doesn't get cut off. And
Absolutely, I appreciate that, Representative, because I know for a fact that during the storm, when we found out that any facility went off that was critical on generating power, we made sure to fill out that form, got it to the TTU, and we CC'd ERCOT, and then eventually the power came back on. So,
well, I appreciate that, but I think both you and Texoga need to just make sure your members understand that they need to be registered in case this happens again.
I completely agree.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Representative Guerin. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Oh, I'm sorry. Vice Chair Herrero.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
No problem.
Sometimes I wrestle with this mask, and I'm sorry, Terry. I want to ask you about members of the organization, and not specifics, but just in general, if you have information regarding whether or not any of them were able to purchase gas when it was available and then store it and then sell it at a price, when it was needed. Have you heard stories of that, or do you know of anything like that?
No, sir. As a trade association, antitrust laws have prohibited us to ever talk about price or anything like that, and so there was no discussion of pricing that we've ever heard.
Yeah, I understand about pricing, but one idea would be if let's assume, right, hypotheticals. I'm a member. I anticipate that because of the weather, there's going to be these issues, and as a result, a shortage of gas. And so I'm in a capacity where I can buy gas, right? But I don't really need it right now, so I'll store it. But then when someone else needs it, or even myself, I can get from there. But if someone else needs it, I'll say, hey, I've got gas, but I'll sell it to you for this price. And we reach an agreement, and we do. But obviously, the price that I want is higher because now the supply is limited and the demand is skyrocketed. So any stories of that? And I'm not asking about price specifics or anything, but just the actual situation unfolding.
I have not heard any stories like that happening, Chairman Herrero. Basically, what we heard about storage during those calls last week is they were all on max draw, trying to take care of human needs customers on their local distribution companies, and meeting the second priority, which was electric generation.
And you mentioned, the prohibition. What are those prohibitions that you mentioned?
The prohibitions.
The pricing. You mentioned, the regulations and things of that nature.
Oh, that being a nonprofit trade association with several member companies who, in many cases, compete with one another, we do not talk pricing at any of our meetings or any of those, or any meetings that they're involved in.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Members, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Gannon. Thank you very much.
Mr.
Thanks for
Chairman,
being
thank
here.
you,
We
Mr.
appreciate the
members.
information. Chair now calls up Michael Lozano. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having us today.
Thanks for being here.
Of course. Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Michael Lozano, and I represent the Permian Basin Petroleum Association. First, I want to thank you for the invitation to join you here today, and note for the committee that our president, Ben Shepard, who many of you do know, would have loved to have been able to join you here today. but unfortunately, he's working on preparing arrangements for the passing of his mother, and so he extends his apologies, and we know that you share our thoughts and prayers for him and his family.
Please send our condolences to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to start with, Ben and I are very proud of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, as we are for all of our member companies. 60 years ago, this organization was founded by oil and gas producers who felt that the region lacked appropriate representation, and our mission is to advocate for the safe and responsible development of our natural resources in the Permian Basin. Our association represents independent drillers who may only drill a single well in a year, as well as those who will drill 12 wells in a single program. We represent the women and men who service those wells, as well as all of the auxiliary services that they entail. PBPA also counts community organizations and leaders as members because of our unwavering commitment to the communities in the Permian Basin. As many of you know, over the last decade, the Permian Basin has shifted from a legacy drilling community to the most prolific oil and gas basin in the world. Some have said that the Permian Basin is now the Saudi Arabia of oil and gas operations, but we'd prefer to note that the Saudis wish that they were the Permian Basin of Texas and New Mexico. We advocate in these two states, and in fact, there are 2 legislative sessions ongoing where we proudly represent our industry in the Texas Capitol, as well as in the New Mexico Roundhouse. The Permian Basin in Texas is home to more than 1 million Texans throughout West Texas, and over the last year, they've struggled and worked through international price wars, pandemics, snowvid, and of course, they've been resilient through it all. At one point, while oil plunged to a negative $37 in trading last year, we have seen the return to about $60, $61 today, in West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark price for our product. And the reason why I bring that up is it's a huge economic value of the Permian Basin for the state of Texas. Our member companies during the last economic downturn led Texas out of a recession, and our members are prepared to do it all over again. As part of our study with the Texas Taxpayers and Research Association Foundation, we learned that in 2019 and 2020, the Permian Basin accounted for more than 70% of all drilling activity in Texas and produced nearly 70% of all oil and 40% of all natural gas. The impacts to state revenues in 2019 and 20 were staggering. Despite these circumstances that we saw over the last few years, Permian producers paid $9 billion in state and local taxes and royalties in 2019 and $7.6 billion in 2020 alone. Among the taxes that our industry contributes include the state severance taxes on oil and gas, the state sales tax, the local property tax, and a specific well servicing tax. These taxes paid do not include the royalties to the Permanent University Fund or the Available School Fund or the Permanent School Fund. Additionally, as of 2019, oil and gas production in Texas accounts for $5.4 billion for transportation projects since voters approved the Economic Stabilization Fund diversion to the State Highway Fund in 2014. Of that $5.4 billion, the Permian Basin accounted for $3.2 billion of those. Our members are unique because they live, work, and raise their families in the Permian Basin, and they care deeply about the success of the communities that call it home. They impress upon us about this importance, and we have worked diligently to advocate on their behalf. The Permian Basin is a vibrant and beneficial community that for only 4% of the population has a very sizable impact on the lives that we're all able to lead and the investments that our state is able to make statewide. I want to thank you for the opportunity to highlight the incredible community and the work that our association has done, and I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that testimony, and we certainly appreciate all your association members. Members, any questions?
Perfect.
Well, good. Thank you very much, and please extend our condolences.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Chair now recognizes Ms. Jennifer Brimmer. And as Ms. Brimmer makes her way to the podium, members, to show that you can go above and beyond and do greater things than where you start. Ms. Brimmer was my first legislative director, so she's... Despite that. She probably didn't put that on her resume as she traveled on to her next job. So welcome.
It was
Hello.
number one on my resume. Good afternoon, Chairman Goldman and committee members. Thank you for having me here today. For the record, my name is Jennifer Bramer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Land and Mineral Owners Association. TLMA currently serves a growing community of over 900 land, mineral, and royalty owners with interests in all 254 counties. Our members own interests in both surface and mineral properties of all sizes. We have some members with mineral producing properties of only an acre, as well as some with over 800,000 acres. At the same time, we have some members who own mineral interests but no actual surface property, and some members who own surface interests but no mineral property. The land represented by our membership is where the oil and gas wells are drilled, the pipelines are buried, the solar farms are platted, and sometimes even the wind turbines erected. Our members are engaged in a complicated and symbiotic partnership with the energy industry. Not to oversimplify it, but we need each other. The energy industry needs what our lands can produce, and we need their expertise, machinery, and transportation systems to harness it. When done right, that partnership benefits not only the operator and the mineral owner, but all Texans who rely on this industry to help make our state so successful. We feel it not only the law of the land, but also a major factor behind the colorful history of this state, that the ability to negotiate private contracts with energy producers is a sacrosanct private property right. And while an oil and gas lease is a privately negotiated document, many decisions this committee will consider have the ability to impact those leases and activities. In the legislative process, we sometimes butt heads with industry over legislation we feel could limit our ability to negotiate or to do something to impede on the contracts we have already entered. However, we strive to find common ground on issues that benefit both sides of the equation. For example, last session, TLMA worked hand in hand with industry to pass a bill protecting royalty owners from deceptive leasing practices initiated by bad actors. Industry also recognized this fraudulent behavior was a blight on the industry, and both sides worked together to put a stop to it, while at the same time making sure that the language did not prohibit the practice of top leasing, which can be a very valuable asset. TLMA also supports efforts to ensure that inactive and orphan wells are plugged in a timely manner. The association was very supportive of efforts enacted in the 2009 legislature that set timelines for the physical cleanup and removal of inactive wells. We are encouraged by recent efforts by the Railroad Commission's Orphan Well program to address the growing number of wells abandoned. We firmly believe that every person, no matter what size their interest is, should have the right to freely negotiate any lease or easement. Our members understand that one lease and easement does not work for all. TLMA supports a healthy and vibrant oil and gas industry and believes that Texas can achieve that while protecting private property rights. Thank you again for your time today, for the invitation to speak to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I trained you well. Yeah, she trained me well. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Thank you. Any questions, members? You did such a thorough job. No questions from any members. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Members, that includes our invited testimony. As I stated in the beginning, we do not and will not be meeting on Monday, our regularly scheduled day, with only 2 bills referred to our committee so far. That we can certainly change that if we get more bills referred to us, but I don't plan on meeting next week, so we will plan on meeting the following week on our regularly scheduled day, Monday. So I do thank you all for being here. Thank you for your very good questions. And with that, there's no further business. The Committee of Energy Resources stands adjourned, subject to call the chair.